One decision changed everything. It tore my family apart, but brought me closer to the truth about who I really am. What followed was a moment of betrayal that, unexpectedly, led to a bond with my daughter. The day had begun as usual. I had just woken up and was at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee in silence, trying to focus on the faint hum of the fridge in the corner. The soft glow from the light above illuminated the room, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch the tension between my husband Daniel and me across the entire house. I had been distant lately, but not in the way most people think. I wasn't exactly pulling away in the physical sense. Daniel still woke up beside me, we still had our dinners together, the occasional movie night, but the emotional distance had begun to settle in like a heavy fog. We weren't fighting, but we weren't close either, and deep down I knew why. It wasn't just Daniel. It wasn't just that we'd fallen into the routine that many couples do after years of marriage. No, it was something deeper, something more primal, and it had everything to do with our daughter Marie. Marie was 18 now, just finishing up her senior year in high school, but there was something about the way she carried herself that I couldn't shake. It was subtle, her confident swagger, the way she looked at me sometimes, the way her hands brushed against mine in moments when she thought no one was watching. There was a closeness between us, a connection, but it wasn't the mother-daughter bond I was used to. It was different. I couldn't explain it. Maybe I was just seeing things that weren't there, but I couldn't ignore the pull I felt every time I looked at her. "Marie's gone to a friend's house for the night," Daniel said from behind me, his voice pulling me back to reality. I hadn't even realized he was standing there, watching me. I nodded, not trusting myself to say anything. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't talk to him about this, about her, about what was happening to me. "You've been quiet lately," Daniel continued, walking toward the kitchen counter. "You've been distant. Is there something going on with you? With us?" There it was, the question I had been dreading, the question that always seemed to come up when things were starting to fall apart. I forced a smile, but I knew it was weak. "I'm fine, just a little tired, that's all." He studied me for a long moment, his eyes narrowing as if trying to find the words to probe deeper. But then he sighed, dropping his gaze to the counter. "I've been feeling it too, you know. I can't remember the last time well, you know." My pulse quickened, but I kept my face neutral. "What do you mean?" He bit his lip, clearly trying to gather his thoughts. "I mean, when was the last time we had a real conversation? A real connection? You used to tell me everything, and now—" He trailed off, his voice faltering as he turned his back to me, clearly frustrated. I swallowed hard, my heart racing. But I knew it wasn't just Daniel who was being ignored, it was me too. I had pushed him away, not because I didn't love him, but because I didn't know how to reconcile the feelings I had. The feelings I couldn't control, no matter how much I tried to bury them. I could feel Daniel's eyes on me, waiting for some kind of response. I opened my mouth, but the words didn't come. Instead, I stood up abruptly, pacing toward the window. I don't know," I muttered, more to myself than to him. "I feel like I'm in a fog, like everything's just—" "Is it about her?" he interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp, cutting through the tension. "Is this about Marie?" I froze. His words hung in the air, thick with accusation. But also something else, something deeper, something I hadn't realized he could sense. The truth. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. Because the truth was more complicated than he could ever imagine. And I wasn't sure if I was ready to admit it to myself, let alone to him. "It's not what you think," I finally managed to say. The words were hollow, and I could feel the weight of them as soon as they left my lips. Daniel's silence was louder than anything. I could feel his disappointment, his frustration building again, but he didn't say anything else. He just turned, walking toward the bedroom. But before he left the room, he paused and glanced back at me. "If you don't tell me what's really going on, I'm going to start wondering what you're hiding." I wanted to tell him. I wanted to come clean, to confess everything, to let him know how twisted things had gotten in my head. But I couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to say the words out loud. Instead, I turned back to the window, watching as the streetlights flickered on outside. My mind was spinning, and I felt like I was drowning in my own thoughts. Marie, the way she looked at me, the way she made me feel. It wasn't normal, I knew that. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something between us, something that neither of us could explain. The door to her room creaked open, and I glanced back to see her standing in the hallway, looking at me. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, everything else faded away. "You okay, Mom?" she asked, her voice low, almost as if she were testing me. I nodded quickly, trying to keep the mask of normalcy in place. Yeah, I'm fine, just tired. Marie didn't seem convinced. She stepped into the living room, her presence suddenly filling the space between us. There was a charged silence, and I felt that familiar tug again, the same one I couldn't escape. She was so close, just a few feet away, but it felt like we were worlds apart. Okay, she said finally, after what felt like an eternity. I'll be in my room if you need anything. As she turned to leave, I couldn't help but watch her. And in that moment, I realized something I couldn't deny any longer. This thing between us wasn't just passing thought. It was real, and I couldn't stop it. I didn't know how to stop it. I knew my life was about to change, that things were going to get worse before they got better. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. Because somewhere, deep down, I knew I'd already crossed a line. The line between a mother and her daughter, and everything else that came after it. The days after Daniel's confrontation felt like walking through fog. Every movement seemed mechanical. Every word exchanged between us seemed forced, strained. I could tell he was still watching me closely, his eyes constantly searching for some hint of the truth that I couldn't give him. But the truth, was more complicated than I could admit. Marie's presence lingered in the house like an electric charge. She was still the same girl in many ways, quiet, intelligent, focused on her future. But something had changed between us, and I couldn't ignore it. Neither could she. The tension between us was palpable, like a thin thread stretched too tightly, ready to snap at any moment. I noticed the way she watched me more carefully now, her gaze lingering on me with an intensity I hadn't seen before. It wasn't the look of a daughter seeking approval, but something else. Something I couldn't quite place. One evening, after dinner, Marie and I ended up alone in the living room. Daniel had retreated upstairs early, his usual quiet frustration hanging in the air. I was sitting on the couch staring blankly at the television, but my mind was 1,000 miles away. Marie sat down beside me, her eyes never leaving the screen, but I could feel the shift. There was an unspoken understanding between us, a weight in the air that neither of us had the courage to address. She had always been a good kid, respectful, never one to overstep boundaries. But now, it felt like we were both on the edge of something dangerous, something that neither of us could control. "Mom," she said, her voice unusually soft, almost hesitant. It was as if she was testing the waters, unsure of how far she could go. I glanced over at her, my heart pounding in my chest. "Yeah?" She hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I know things have been weird lately. With you and Dad. With us." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt my pulse race. I wanted to dismiss it, to act like nothing was different, but I couldn't. Everything between us had changed, and I wasn't sure if I could go back. "It's just," she continued, her eyes flicking briefly toward me before darting away. "I don't know. I guess I've been feeling like you're not really here, you know? Like you're here, but you're not really present." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm sorry if it feels that way. I've just been distracted." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she turned her head slightly, her gaze lingering on me, studying my face. It was like she was searching for something deeper than just the surface-level exchange of words. The tension in the room grew thicker, and I could feel myself becoming more aware of her, of the way her presence filled the space around us. There was something about the way she looked at me, something raw and vulnerable, yet confident, almost daring me to look back. And for the first time, I felt a pang of something that made my stomach twist. The connection between us wasn't just motherly, it was more than that, and it was impossible to deny any longer. I leaned back, trying to clear my thoughts. "Marie, Before I could finish, she shifted closer, her arm brushing against mine. The small touch sent a jolt of electricity through me, and I froze. It wasn't intentional, I told myself. But the way she didn't pull away, the way she didn't even seem to notice that her touch lingered, made my heart race faster. "I know things aren't great," she said again, her voice lower now, more intimate. "But I still care about you, Mom. I just want us to be okay again." The sincerity in her voice made my chest tighten, and for a moment, I almost forgot who I was. But there was no way I could forget what was happening between us not anymore. The unspoken words hung heavy in the air, suffocating us both. I cleared my throat, trying to shake off the tension that had settled between us. I care about you too, Marie, but you need to understand this isn't easy. I know, she whispered, her voice barely audible, but I think we can fix it if we just talk more. If we just, you know, connect again. My breath caught in my throat as her words seemed to pull me deeper into something I wasn't sure I could handle. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. It was as if my body had betrayed me, like I couldn't keep pretending that everything was normal. Not with her. Not anymore. I shifted uncomfortably, trying to regain control. Marie, we need to be careful. We can't. But then she did something that made my heart stop. She reached out and placed her hand on mine, her fingers brushing gently against my skin. The simple touch sent a shock of heat rushing through my body, and for a brief moment I couldn't breathe. I didn't pull away. I didn't know how to. I'm sorry if I've been too much, she said, her voice breaking the silence. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. I don't know how to fix things. The sincerity in her words was overwhelming, but there was something else too. Something deeper. Something more dangerous. I looked at her, my mind racing. The weight of the moment was unbearable, the pull between us undeniable. I knew I should have pulled away, should have stood up and walked out of the room before things went any further, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I found myself leaning in, ever so slightly, drawn to her like a moth to a flame. Her eyes met mine, dark and intense, and for a split second, I thought I saw something there, something that mirrored my own longing, my own confusion. I didn't move. Neither did she. Then the door creaked open, and Daniel stepped into the room. The spell was broken. Marie pulled her hand away quickly, her face flushing with embarrassment, and I snapped back to reality. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching us with a look I couldn't quite decipher. The tension was thick, suffocating, and the room suddenly felt too small. I thought I heard something, Daniel said, his voice shaky. What's going on here? I stood up, trying to hide the panic rising in my chest. Nothing, we were just talking. Marie stood as well, her face pale, and for a moment, I saw something in her eyes, a mix of regret, confusion, and something else that I couldn't place. Daniel didn't say anything else. He just turned and left the room, the door clicking shut behind him. The silence that followed felt deafening, and I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had just changed. I wanted to go after him, to explain myself, to fix what had just happened. But I couldn't fix this, not anymore. Marie didn't speak, she just stood there, her back to me, staring at the spot where Daniel had just been. The air between us had shifted irreversibly, and I wasn't sure if I could ever go back to pretending like it hadn't. It's strange. The way a moment can slip by without you realizing just how much it's going to change everything. 1 minute, everything feels normal. The next, the weight of it all is crushing you. Daniel's absence that evening wasn't a relief like I thought it would be, was the exact opposite. It left an emptiness in the house that felt wrong. His footsteps up the stairs had barely echoed when I felt that familiar pull toward Marie again. The tension between us was undeniable now, a magnetic force that neither of us could deny, but also something neither of us knew how to handle. It wasn't just the glances anymore, the accidental touches. It was the way our bodies responded to each other, the way the air seemed to vibrate with every unspoken word. The next few days passed in a blur of awkward moments and stolen glances. Every time Marie walked into a room, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. She'd smile like everything was normal, like I wasn't the one whose thoughts were now tangled with hers in ways they shouldn't be. But there were moments when I could tell she wasn't pretending anymore. The way her eyes would linger on me just a bit too long, the way her breath would catch when we brushed against each other in the hallway, it was all too much. Then, one night, it happened. Daniel had gone to bed early, the way he usually did when things were off between us. Marie and I found ourselves alone, again. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, and I could feel my heart racing as I stood in the kitchen, wiping down the counters. I could hear her footsteps behind me before I even turned around. I need to talk to you, Marie said, her voice low but urgent. She was standing there in the doorway, looking at me, the weight of her gaze pulling at me like a magnet. I tried to act calm, to force myself to be normal. What about? I don't know how to explain this, she began, taking a step toward me, her eyes never leaving mine. There was something in them, something dark and conflicted. I don't know what's happening between us, but I can't ignore it anymore. The air between us seemed to thicken, every word stretching the distance between us even though we were so close. My hands shook slightly as I placed the dish towel on the counter, unsure of what to say. My heart pounded in my chest, my pulse thumping in my ears. I don't know what you mean, I said, though the words felt hollow. How could I pretend? How could I keep lying to myself? Marie didn't back away. Instead, she stepped forward, closing the distance between us until there was barely any space left. She looked up at me, her face just inches from mine. I could feel her breath on my skin, warm and steady, and I realized that, at this moment, I wasn't sure if I could pull away. I mean, this, she whispered, her voice so soft that it almost felt like a secret. Her hand reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face, and the simple touch sent a jolt of electricity through my body. I froze. I couldn't breathe. For a moment, nothing existed except for the two of us standing there in that kitchen, with everything we hadn't said hanging between us. And then she kissed me. It was so unexpected, so out of nowhere, that I didn't know how to react. Her lips pressed against mine with a tenderness that stole the breath from my lungs. I couldn't pull away, couldn't force myself to do anything except stand there, frozen. Her kiss deepened, soft and searching, as if she was testing the waters, unsure whether I'd pull back or not. But I didn't. I kissed her back. I didn't know how or why it was happening. I didn't know how we'd reached this point, but I couldn't stop it. The weight of everything, the years of distance between me and Daniel, the confusing emotions I had toward my daughter, came crashing down on me, and I couldn't keep pretending like it wasn't real. In that moment, our bodies seemed to move of their own accord, drawn together by an irresistible force. The space between us dissolved, leaving only the thrum of tension. The kiss wasn't like anything I'd ever experienced. It was a surrender, a release from the pent-up emotions that had been simmering beneath the surface. Time stood still as our lips met, the world outside that kitchen fading into obscurity. It was just the two of us, lost in a sea of emotions, desire, and fear. Every boundary, every reservation melted away, leaving only the raw, unbridled connection between us. The world outside that kitchen ceased to exist. It was just the two of us, tangled in a mess of emotions, desire, and fear. Marie pulled away first, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She looked at me, eyes wide, as if searching for something in my face. She was waiting for a reaction, waiting to see if I'd pull away, if I'd tell her this was wrong. But all I could do was look at her. I couldn't speak. The words didn't come. My chest felt tight, and I felt like I was drowning in my own confusion. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her voice cracking, the weight of her regret clear in her tone. But there was something else there too, something that made my stomach churn with both guilt and longing. I shouldn't have done that. I didn't know how to answer. How could I? The truth was, I didn't regret it. Not really. I reached out, placing a hand on her arm, my fingers brushing against her skin. "Marie, we can't do this," I whispered, my voice barely audible. It's not right." She nodded, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. "I didn't mean to make it weird, I just couldn't stop." Neither could I. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything I'd ever experienced. I knew I should have walked away, should have told her that this was the end of whatever this was, but I couldn't. Instead, I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, as she slowly pulled away from me. I wanted to say something to fix it, to make everything go back to normal, but nothing felt like it would make a difference. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. "I'll go to my room," she said softly, her voice strained as she turned to leave. I didn't stop her, I couldn't, and as she walked away, I stood there in the kitchen, my hands shaking, my mind reeling. I didn't know what was happening anymore, didn't know how to process what we'd just shared. But I knew one thing for sure. Nothing was the same. The truth was, I couldn't walk away from this. Not now. And I didn't know if I ever could. I couldn't breathe. The seconds stretched into infinity as I stood there in the kitchen, my hands still shaking from the kiss. It felt like I had just stepped into another world one. I wasn't sure I could leave. The air in the room was thick, and the silence felt suffocating. My thoughts were scattered, broken pieces that I couldn't make sense of, and the guilt, the confusion, was overwhelming. I should have stopped it. I should have pulled away. But I hadn't. Instead, I stood there, paralyzed, my body betraying me as much as my mind had. The last thing I wanted was to hurt Daniel or destroy the fragile bond I'd once had with my daughter. But the truth was, it was already too late for that. I wandered through the house aimlessly after Marie left, the emptiness surrounding me. I couldn't face Daniel not after what had happened. He had no idea, and I wasn't sure I could ever look him in the eyes again without seeing the lie I had become. It was a few hours before I saw Marie again. The house was dark except for the soft light coming from her bedroom, and when I knocked softly on her door, my heart thudded painfully in my chest. It was now or never. I couldn't avoid her anymore. I couldn't pretend that nothing had happened. When she opened the door, she was standing there in a t-shirt and pajama pants, looking like the same girl she had always been. But she wasn't. Not anymore. Not after what we had shared. "Mom," she said, her voice low. She seemed as uncertain as I felt. "Can we talk?" I nodded, stepping into the room. It felt strange, being in here in her space with the weight of everything hanging between us. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she started, her eyes avoiding mine as she sat down on the edge of her bed. "I never meant to hurt you. I don't know." It felt like everything was pulling us closer, and I couldn't stop myself. I could see the confusion in her eyes, the same one I was feeling. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. She was my daughter. I was her mother. But the way she was looking at me, the way she spoke, it was like we had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "You didn't hurt me," I whispered, though I didn't even know what that meant anymore. "It's not your fault, it's just complicated." "I never expected it to be like this, Marie. I never expected you to feel this way." There was a long pause, and then she looked up at me, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "What happens now, Mom? Are we supposed to pretend like this didn't happen?" I shook my head, my chest tightening. "I don't know. I don't know what to do, but I know that we can't just go back to what we were before. It's too late for that." Marie's gaze dropped, and I could see the pain in her eyes. "I don't want things to be messed up between us," she said quietly, her voice breaking. "But I don't want to lose you either." The words hit me harder than I expected. I didn't know how to fix this. I didn't know how to go back to the way things were. All I knew was that I had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. "I don't want to lose you either," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "But I'm scared, Marie. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know what it means for us now." There was a long, painful silence between us. I could hear the clock ticking in the background, and it felt like the minutes were dragging on forever. I didn't know if I could handle it, this crushing weight of knowing that we had both felt something we shouldn't have. Finally, Marie stood up, walking over to me. She didn't say anything she didn't need to. She just placed her hand gently on my shoulder, her fingers warm against my skin. For a moment, everything seemed to stand still. All the noise, all the confusion faded away, leaving just the two of us. "I think we need some time," Marie said softly, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "To figure things out. I don't know what's going to happen, but I think we need to take a step back." I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and dread. I knew she was right. We needed space-time to breathe, time to think, but I also knew that things could never be the same again. "I'll give you all the time you need," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. For the first time in a long while, I didn't know what the future held. Everything was uncertain, and the one thing I had always believed to be true of family was now fractured, broken by something I couldn't control. Marie turned to leave, but then she paused, her back still to me. "I love you, Mom," she said quietly, her voice so soft I almost didn't hear it. "I just want you to know that." "I love you too, Marie," I said, the words feeling foreign on my lips, but I meant them. I always had. Even when things had gotten messy, even when I didn't know what was happening anymore, I still loved her. She left the room without another word, and I stood there for a moment, listening to the faint sound of her footsteps receding down the hallway. The house felt empty again, but it wasn't just Daniel's absence I was feeling. It was everything, the weight of the past, the confusion of the present, and the uncertainty of what was to come. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. I couldn't deny that what had passed between Marie and me had been more than just a mistake. It had been a connection, something that I didn't know how to explain, but I also couldn't ignore the fact that it had broken something in me, something that couldn't be fixed with time or words. I didn't know where to go from here. All I knew was that the line had been crossed and there was no going back. I had lost something that I could never get back, and the truth was, I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. As I lay down in bed that night, the darkness surrounding me, I realized something. Sometimes, the things we try to bury don't stay buried. They rise to the surface, and no matter how hard we try to ignore them, they change us. Forever. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know how to make sense of any of it. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't lie to myself. And whatever happened now, I had to face it.